Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Hello and welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. I'm Paul Vogelzang. Today, we celebrate the joys and challenges of life after 50 with inspiring stories, insightful conversations, and plenty of good cheer. Happy holidays to everybody. Just want to make sure and express that to you and let you know that this episode is one you're not going to want to miss. We've all felt the weight of life's disappointments. Certainly as we get older, those disappointments build. Sometimes they're unexpected, these losses, the heartbreak of saying goodbye to loved ones, or even the relentless stress of a world in turmoil. It's in those darkest moments that joy can seem impossibly out of reach. But what if joy isn't something we find only in bright, happy times? What if it's something we can discover, nurture, and even create in the midst of life's struggles? Joining us today is someone who has done just that. Author, columnist, Smithsonian Associate Stephen Petrow is a celebrated journalist and essayist. He's an author whose work has graced the pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times. Stephen Petrow will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Please check out our show notes today for more details and Smithsonian links, but we have Stephen Petrow today. Stephen Petrow is known for his poignant reflections on aging, health, and civility, but Stephen's latest book, The Joy You Make, Find the Silver Linings Even on Your Darkest Days, is perhaps the most personal and uplifting work yet from Stephen Petrow. Stephen isn't just talking theory here. He's lived this truth. After losing both of his parents in the same year, navigating the heartbreak of divorce from his husband, and watching his sister battle a terminal illness, Stephen Petrow embarked on a deeply personal journey to understand joy. What he discovered was life-changing, that joy isn't the same as happiness, and that it can be found even in the most unlikely places. In our conversation today, Stephen Petrow will share moving stories from his own life, wisdom from experts that he interviewed, and practical ways we can all cultivate joy, whether it's through connecting with others, embracing gratitude, or finding humor in the little things. So settle in and prepare to be inspired. It's my great pleasure to welcome Smithsonian Associate Stephen Petrow to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series. Let's just dive in. Stephen Petrow, welcome to the program. So good to have you. Happy holidays. We're talking at the end of the Thanksgiving holiday. I hope you and yours are well, and I hope the upcoming holidays are just wonderful for you, Stephen.
Thank you, Paul. I'm really glad to be with you today.
I'm excited to talk about this subject. I think we all need a little joy in our lives, and you've written this wonderful new book, The Joy You Make. I want to get into that, absolutely. But let's start at the start. Tell our audience a little bit, just briefly, about what you're going to be sharing with us when you present to Smithsonian Associates. We'll have links so their audience can find out more. But maybe just tell us what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, and how you're going to use Zoom to keep us engaged.
So this is either the third or the fourth presentation I've done with Smithsonian Associates, but it's the first that's going to be virtual. The others have been in the actual, I guess, the basement of a castle. I'm not really sure. I'm excited that we're going to be able to use Zoom for this because I think we'll have a larger reach as a result. And by we, I'm not using the royal we. I'm going to be in conversation with my friend and fellow author, Todd Dowdy, who is the author of Little Pieces of Hope. And I think we're going to have an exciting conversation about how to find joy, especially in some of these more challenging times, whether we're talking about aftermath of the election, fears about climate change, or just the holiday season. It's a tough time for many people this month of December. We're going to have an engaging conversation. I know there's going to be room for questions, and best of my knowledge, it's on Thursday, December 12th.
It is going to be from 6:45 to 8 o'clock, and Thursday evening, they're at the Smithsonian right downtown, D.C., and available on Zoom everywhere. Well, why don't we start talking about the book then too, Stephen? Because I think we all are in need of some uplift during these times. And this particular month, the holidays in general, can be challenging for so many. What inspired you about writing this? I know you've had some personal challenges. We all have them, and you've been pretty candid about all of that. But what inspired you really to do this?
I think that's a really important question. What inspired me to write this book? So much of what I write comes out of my personal life. And as a columnist for the Washington Post, I would say half of those pieces are me trying to figure out some problem that I hope has resonance with others. In this case, 2017 was kind of a dark year for me. My parents died, my mom in January, my dad in April, and then my husband and I separated in between those two dates. And then my sister was diagnosed with ovarian cancer later that year. It's not a good cancer. I found it really challenging to get out of the darkness. It just kind of felt like it was settling on me. And I started reading and I started doing some activities just kind of for the hell of it. I didn't understand that I was trying to find joy early on. But as time went on, a lot of the exercises, a lot of the practices I was doing started to lead me in that direction. I found that there was a lift that came from that. And then in the middle of the pandemic, and obviously by the time we're in the pandemic, many of us are challenged. We're at home. We're not in our office places. Early on, there's no vaccine. So, there's a great deal of medical fear and to mask, not to mask vaccines. So the cloud had settled. So I published a column in January of 2022, how to find a little bit of joy in the dark. The reaction was very strong. People grabbed onto that. Where is my little bit of joy, my joy hit, my snatch of joy? And I could see that they, like me, were really hungry for more joy in their lives and in our lives. That's kind of how the book came to be. Literally, after that column was published, my literary agent had a phone call from Maria Shriver, and she is the publisher of the Open Field imprint at Penguin Random House. I did not know that part of her resume at the time. And she was very interested in seeing if I could turn 1,000 words into 60,000 words. So I thought about it for about a week and I wrote some notes and decided the answer was yes. Part of my challenge, Paul, was though, I'm not inherently a bubbly or joyous type of person. And I was thinking at the outset, I wonder if I'm really the right person because sometimes people have called me Eeyore. I'm known to be a little bit of a curmudgeon. I could definitely be this glass that is half empty, not half full.
Yeah.
But I embarked on this and I realized I'm probably like the best subject because if I can find more joy and if I can share more joy, well, then just about anyone else can. And that is what happened.
Well, Stephen, you make this really interesting distinction that in my mind, certainly in hearing your answer and in reading the book and my research of you, there is this distinction between joy and happiness. And that's a crucial one to understand, that distinction. Maybe tell us, because all of us might not be bubbly. We might not have this real bounce all the time, but we can be joyful.
We can be joyful. I'm really glad to talk about that. I wish I had my two props with me. I'm deficient today, but I'll describe them. Because happiness is an emotion that is usually externally driven. So you get a promotion, I'm happy. You win an Emmy for your podcast, you're happy, I'm happy too. Your wife is happy and your new dog. But
right.
especially the new dog, because there could be more treats.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a very externally driven emotion. It is also short-lived. You sort of get that bounce, that hit, and then I sort of make the analogy, it's like eating a Twinkie. I wish I had that hit with me because when you eat a Twinkie, you're going to get an amazing sugar rush. And then 30 minutes later, you're going to just crash down because the sugar rush is over. That's happiness. Joy, by contrast, is eating a hearty whole wheat muffin. It is going to satiate you. It's going to fill you. It's going to stay with you for a much longer period of time. What it represents is that joy is a state that lives within us. It does not have to be activated from the outside. Sometimes we have to go searching for it in ourselves. And the book is about 30 different ways that we can do that. But it lives within us. And so the reason the book is called The Joy You Make, that is really giving us agency to find, cultivate, and tap into that joy. So that's one really crucial distinction between happiness and joy. And then the other is related. Happiness is usually just about me. Joy is usually about you and me or the we. Based on the literature and the research that I read, I have another food analogy, which is if I eat a delicious brownie, Paul, all by myself, I'm going to love that and I'm going to make me happy and fatter. If I bake a pan of brownies and I share them with a group of people, that is a whole different set of feelings. And that is creating a little bit of a community. That is me giving to someone or vice versa. And that is a much more joyful type of moment, that communion and connection with others.
I really do think we need one another. I think the joy that comes from the holidays is that connection with others. It can produce anxiety, maybe some bad vibes at times, but that connection is certainly what drives me. In your research for the book, what particular story? I mean, we'll talk about Julie in just a moment. You mentioned your sister Julie and her battle with cancer. But aside from Julie, what struck you as being a real memorable experience that you came across with regard to this subject of joy? And how did that shape you in writing the book?
A couple of different things come to mind, but I think one thing that I want to note, especially for the Smithsonian audience, is that this book is comprised of a lot of interviews that I did with research scholars, with psychologists, psychiatrists, sociologists, ethicists. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of science in this book, and there's actually a lot of science about joy these days, which comes as a surprise to people. There is my own narrative. So this part of this is memoir, and then part of it is interviewing, talking to other people about their stories. One of the first activities that I did, and this was a little bit before I had a plan, I started taking pictures during the pandemic, photographs. I have an old iPhone that people make fun of me for because I can hold it in my hand. And then I was posting these pictures of, they were pretty things, sunrises and moonrises and flowers, and people were liking them. And I was liking that they were liking them. I mean, I would get the likes and I would get a little dopamine hit and we're off to the races. I was using the hashtags joy, joyful, and beauty is everywhere. Then I started noticing that other people, some of whom I knew, but most whom I did not, were posting their own photographs and using the same hashtags. And at that moment, I felt like we were speaking to each other. We were starting this conversation around joy and around beauty. And that was so much more gratifying. And that was really the first time I felt it in my body, how important connection is to joy. And at the same time, it helped me lean into the notion of gratitude. And really, gratitude and connection are the foundational pillars of joy. I was grateful for what I was seeing. And to be grateful, you have to be in relationship with someone. And so that little photography exercise, which I continue to do to today, it really opened my eyes.
Hi, it's Paul. Do you love entertaining, informative, eclectic, insightful programs about culture, health, science, life, and everything Smithsonian? As part of our Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast, we're introducing you to the new Smithsonian Associates streaming series. Smithsonian, a nonprofit organization, is excited to present this new aspect of their 55 years as the world's largest museum-based educational program. Join us from the comfort of your home as we periodically interview Smithsonian Associate guest speakers. Our audience here on radio and podcast can explore our website for more information, links, and details at notold-better.com. Thanks, everybody. Our guest is Stephen Petrow, who's written the wonderful new book, The Joy You Make. Stephen mentioned Maria Shriver. She has said about the book, I love this quote, Petrow shows us all how to make joy our life's companion, no matter our circumstances. It's really wonderful. And so I want to talk to you for just a second about your sister Julie, because her resilience, her capacity for joy is such a powerful element. I could tell in your life and certainly represented in the book. Tell us about some of the lessons that you think might be relevant for our Smithsonian audience, particularly those of us who are over the age of 60. We're looking for this difference between happiness and what joy can bring, and this needed connection that we've got to have with one another.
Well, Paul, thank you for asking me about Julie. I'm going to take a deep breath here. As I mentioned, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in November of 2017. She died from that cancer last year in June, which was about 5.5 years. And much of my life during that time was being Julie's brother and being Julie's advocate. And she helped me to see, and she helped our whole family to see, that even having what is usually a terminal diagnosis, we were able to go much deeper in our individual and our family relationships. We learned how to be present for each other. both in the hospital when she was having procedures over the holidays. And then at the end, our whole family was there when she did die. She embodied this joy. She must have been eating whole wheat muffins her whole life. She was born with this big smile on her face. And in the last picture we have as a family, which is the day before she died, she has that smile. And I'll just tell you, I guess, people wonder, how can you hold joy and grief and sadness at the same time? And it sounds like it's counterintuitive. Curiously, researchers say joy is about the only emotion that can cohabitate with other emotions. You really can't be happy and be sorrowful. So her birthday, which was 3 months before she died, it was her 61st birthday. She wanted to have a big birthday party. And at the same time, she'd stopped treatment. So she also knew this was going to be a goodbye party of sorts. We held those two parties. We had two different chocolate cakes. There were two sets of emotions among our family and close friends, supporting her, supporting each other. And you would be crying one minute and then you'd be laughing the next. And you could kind of just feel how you are a whole person through this. And that was a gift that she gave to us. One other thing that I learned about joy early on was I thought joy was what happens on New Year's Eve or July 4th or your wedding. It's kind of the Big Bang theory of joy. And many of us are confused about that. I was too at the beginning. That is one kind of joy. And that is what the scholars call ecstatic joy. But there's serene joy. There's religious joy. There's spiritual joy. There's Schadenfreude, which is the joy we take when someone messes up or, whatever that is. It is a joy. It's not one that I particularly endorse. But I think what you see is there are many different kinds of joy. And also, so once we start to understand this collection of different joys, it's much easier to realize them in your day-to-day life. Every day can't be New Year's Eve, thank God, in its own way. But that's not how life works. And so partly that photography exercise was finding the small joy that day. And they do happen every day.
You talk about some ingredients that bring this all together very much in almost a recipe form. And we talked about connection, but you also make mention of gratitude and kindness. And as we're going through some difficult times and as we look forward into the month of December, what's the easily accessible trait that we can grab onto first? Is it connection, or can we be kind to one another? Should we be doing all three of these things? Should we be expressing gratitude for everything that we've got? What's the simplest way to approach this quickly?
Well, what you just suggested exhausted me. So I'm not going to suggest people try 5 things at once in December. No, in December, when they're worrying about holiday gifts and maybe parties, not holiday gifts and not parties. There's so much loneliness overall in our country at this time. The Surgeon General has talked about this epidemic of loneliness.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to talk about a couple here. And the one that resonates most easily to an individual, I say, do that one. Gratitude has suddenly become like so current and everybody's talking about gratitude. And in a way, like I'm over gratitude because it seems played out, but I'm not really, because as I said earlier, having a sense of gratitude makes you reflect on what's good in your life. And the science says if you keep a gratitude journal for 21 days, which is 3 weeks, and what they suggest is that before you go to bed, you write down 3 things that you're grateful for. And I tell you, before I did it, I was skeptical. I was the Eeyore. And I was like, really? And then I decided I was going to do it, Paul. And then I thought, well, I'm not going to have anything to be grateful for. I'm going to be like the biggest loser here. But I did jump in, and I jumped in earnestly. It was kind of amazing. I solved the problem of climate change on day one. I had friends over for dinner. I did various activities with people. I helped my sister with something. We played a board game. We went hiking. I read a wonderful book. I talked about a wonderful book. All of these were the small things that make up what we're grateful for. And so over those 21 days, I found that I was starting to wake up on the right side of the bed rather than the wrong side. And I think previously I was going to bed and I would be like, I wasn't writing it down, Paul, but I would be like listing my grievances for the day. So-and-so did me wrong. This didn't go well. And then you go to sleep and you kind of have that tape going in your head. It's not helpful. Then you wake up still on that side of the bed. It is something that I suggest that people try. You don't even need to get any kind of journal. You can just write on scraps of paper and put them in a mason jar or something, and then look back at them at another time. But taking this moment to create a space where you're trying to be open to what is good in your life will make a fundamental difference. And some of the other things that I suggest play off of that. I talk about board games and the whole notion of playing to be with people, not to win. And that was, I'll tell you, I grew up playing the game of Risk, which you may have as well, but that's about world domination. It's a very boy game.
Yeah.
And, that's about winning. And so this notion of playing for the experience, playing to be with others, it's wonderful and it's fun. And it also takes me to another theme, which is as we get older, we begin to protect ourselves. The world is a scary place. And if anyone has like a photograph of themselves as a baby, I suggest taking that out and looking at it and then think, well, how do you look now? And how have you come to protect yourself so that you don't get hurt in this world? Playing games, doing activities with others, dancing, we start to take off those layers and we allow ourselves to be seen by others. And then that would allow you to see into me. Mm-hmm. And there's something truly jubilant about that. It is a matter of becoming vulnerable, which is a scary thing. I acknowledge that. And that was one of the hardest pieces of this for me. How can I become open and vulnerable without being overwhelmed? But I saw slowly that it paid off because others did the same. And then we're getting back to that connection.
Smithsonian associate Stephen Petrow has been our guest today. Stephen, the book, The Joy You Make, is wonderful. Thanks so much for all of your hard work. Congratulations on this book. I think selfishly, I'd love to have you back. I could talk to you about this subject for a long time. I think our audience needs to hear this. Maybe leave us with one or two quick tips, actionable steps that we can take in between today and when we see you next at Smithsonian.
One thing I also came to see was sometimes joy is not right here in our view. It's inside of us and it's in our memories. So think about how you can reach back in time. And I talk in the book about maybe you've saved letters and the handwriting of that person. Maybe you can make a recipe or two that someone in your family made. One of the things I do, Julie made this ring for me from some earrings that she had before she died, and she passed it on to me. These little sapphires I remember in her ears, and that takes me back to a joy in the past. So
that's lovely.
There's anticipatory joy, there's the joy of memory, and there's the joy of the right here and now. And I really appreciate you, Paul, and thank you for this wonderful interview.
Well, thank you, Stephen. So nice to meet you. So nice to talk to you about the joy you make. We will have links so that our audience can find out more about Stephen, more about his new book, The Joy You Make, and more information about his upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. Happy holidays to you, Stephen. My best to you. Congratulations on all of this work. And please come back and talk to us again.
Absolutely. And happy holidays to you, your wife, and your puppy.
Our puppy. Thank you. Well, I'll let you go and you can go rescue your dog and all will be right with the world. But thank you so much, Stephen. My thanks to Smithsonian Associate Stephen Petrow for his time today. Please check out our show notes for more details and Smithsonian links about Stephen and his new book, The Joy You Make. Find the silver linings even on your darkest days. My thanks to the Smithsonian team for all they do to support the show. My thanks to Sam Henniger for his work here. My thanks to you, our wonderful audience on radio and podcast. Be well, be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. To find out more about all of today's stories or to view our extensive back catalog of previous shows, simply visit notold-better.com. Join us again next time as we deep dive into some of the most fascinating real-life stories from across the world, all focused on this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show.
Hi, one final thing. Please check out our website for this episode and all episodes at notold-better.com or subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. And be sure to check out your local radio stations to find out more about the Not Old Better Show on podcast and radio. You can find us all over social media. Our Twitter feed is Not Old Better, and we're on Instagram at Not Old Better too. The Not Old Better Show is a production of NOBS Studios. I'm Paul Vogelsang, and I hope you'll join me again next time to talk about better. The Not Old Better Show. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.